It's preparing, sir.
Okay. It is streaming live now.
It's preparing, sir. Yes.
On.
Hello, Sandeep.
Yes, sir. We are live, sir.
Yeah. Are we live? Okay.
Shall we begin? Nandan, we are live.
Then we should begin. Would you begin the introduction? Then we can.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Warm greetings from the Council of Architecture. I welcome you all to COA Social Reads #1. This is another vertical that we've just started, and we are inaugurating the issue with Professor Juhani Pallasmaa, and we are honored to have him here with us. We initiated the COA Social series a couple of months ago during the lockdown to reach out to our fraternity and increase awareness about architecture and its allied fields. And we have done about 12 dialogues in the COA Social Dialogue platform, which have been a great hit. And we have stalwarts like Dean and Doshiji and so many others who have come and discussed their thoughts. We think dialogue is a very important aspect of architecture and architectural awareness, because dialogue increases interaction, and dialogue also increases the thought process and increases the interaction amongst fraternity. And now we are starting COA Social Reads, and Durganand Balsavar ji is coordinating the whole process. And here we are with the first in the series, COA Social Reads with Professor Juhani Pallasmaa. It gives me great pleasure to you. Welcome, Professor Pallasmaa. Welcome to Council of Architecture and COA Social Reads. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you on this platform and inaugurating this platform of COA Social Reads. It basically concerns books written by eminent people like you, and dialogue and thoughts on those books. And I'm sure we have lined up a couple of more in the series, and we'll come out with more interesting discussions in this vertical as well. And Nandan, I hand it over to you to explain the reads further. And I welcome all once again on behalf of the Council of Architecture and the COA social team, who have been working very hard on this platform behind the scenes, behind the doors, to bring these very intense, intrinsic dialogues to all of you. Thank you so much. Welcome once again.
Thank you. I would request architect Vivek Gupta to give a broad overview of COA Social Reads, and then I will introduce our guest, Professor Juhani Pallasmaa, and then we will begin the conversation.
Hi, everyone. This is the first of the great initiative that has been taken in terms of bringing the academia also mainstream to the fraternity. In fact, for people who are uninitiated in Juhani Pallasmaa, in India, we are 100,000 architects currently who are registered with the council, 100,000 plus architects currently registered with the council. And at the rate that we are churning out about 20,000 plus architects every year. So there is a sizable number of people who are interested in the field of architecture. Also, whilst COA Social Dialogues has been doing a lot in the field of practicing architects, bringing their work and the dialogue with them to the fraternity, Nandan's idea and led by the council to also include how the academia can be also included, and that the interesting books that have been written by various authors can also be enlightening for the rest of the fraternity. And who better than Nandan, who's been in the forefront of academics also, apart from practice, and he has been reading and reviewing and doing a lot of work in academics. So I think great initiative, and we look forward to making a great interaction with you today and in times to come. Thank you. Over to Nandan.
Thank you. Welcome to everyone. A warm welcome to Professor Juhani Pallasmaa, who needs no introduction. And we at the Council COA Social Reads Forum are delighted to have you on our platform today to speak about your new book, Inseminations, Seeds for Architectural Thought. I thank the President of the Council to support initiatives of this kind, which are reaching the remotest schools in India. And we have schools from Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Singapore, Sri Lanka also who've logged in. And so let me first briefly, Professor Pallasmaa, thank you for joining us. I would briefly read an introduction, though we all know you need no introduction. It's a formality that we would perform. Professor Juhani Pallasmaa is an architect, designer, writer, and professor emeritus, and has practiced design since 1962, and between 83 and 2012 through his office in Helsinki. He has held prestigious positions at the rector of the Institute of Industrial Design, director of the Museum of Finnish Architecture, professor and dean of the School of Architecture, Helsinki University of Technology, and several visiting prestigious professorships in the US. He has taught and lectured in numerous universities in Europe, North and South America, Africa, Asia, and Australia. Professor Pallasmaa has been an esteemed member of the Pritzker Architecture Prize jury between 2008 and 2014. Professor Pallasmaa is also an honorary member of SAFA AIA Admiriba, an academician of the International Academy of Architecture, and has received numerous Finnish and international awards and 5 honorary doctorates. He has published 60 books and over 400 essays. That's what the official note says. But I just learned a few days back that it's crossing 900. The figure 400 is not quite right. Am I right, Professor? It's touching
Yes,
900 or more. Wonderful, wonderful.
Even today, I found 2 more in my files.
Wonderful. Over 900 essays, articles, and prefaces, which have been translated in a minimum, I think, at least 35 languages. His widely known books, and these books have reached almost every school of architecture and student in India: The Embodied Image, The Thinking Hand, The Architecture of Image, Existential Space in Cinema, and of course, The Eyes of the Skin. So today's conversation is inspired by the new book, Insemination, Seeds for Architectural Thought. Professor, if we may start, I would maybe start with a small provocation and then As you said, you celebrate uncertainty. I think it can flow as it flows. This conversation, the context of the book, over the last few decades, you often mentioned that the task of architecture is to resurrect the experiential encounter, the experience of architecture, and as a dialogue between the human self and the act of spatial construct. Uh, could you elaborate on this journey of yours, because which culminates in this book, which is an encyclopedia of, I think, the past few decades. Would you elaborate on this idea for us, and then we can unfold in the way it unfolds?
Let me start by saying that I never consciously decided to become a writer. In fact, I wanted to become a medical doctor, a surgeon to start with. And I don't know even today what made me to enter the School of Architecture, which of course determined my further life. In the middle of mid-1960s, I wrote my first piece, and then I have my writing activity has become denser and denser. And when I closed down my design activities of my office 10 years ago, I realized I had turned into a writer. And ever since, for the last 10 years, I have been writing 10 hours every day, including Saturdays and Sundays. And I'm every now and then asked, why did I shift from design to writing? And my honest answer is, I didn't shift anything. I'm still doing architecture. Now with words, I'm trying to describe verbally architectural events and feelings and experiences. So I can sincerely say that I haven't changed my profession at all. And when I'm every now and then introduced as a theoretician of architecture, I object to it. I'm not a theoretician. I'm not theorizing anything. I'm just expressing and mediating my experiences. Everything that I say is based on personal experience, encounter with the world, buildings and other humans. It's not theorizing, it is describing. And I'm not either attempting to create any theory, comprehensive idea of architecture. I'm just trying to open up views. And that is where my book Inseminations comes in. It provides a multitude of views into the phenomenon of architecture and its experience.
If I may ask you, in this view, you talk about a few tasks of architecture, and you begin with mentioning that you somehow kind of feel that animals who have been building their own habitats for millions of years seem to have perfected their own architecture better than humans. Am I right in that kind of a perception that I would carry after I read a book like that? And that humans who've been engaged with architecture relatively maybe for a few tens of thousands of years are still grappling with the idea of architecture, because you call it, if I am not, you call it an impure discipline, because it overlays so many other issues which architects are grappling with. You know, that it's almost as if architecture was a little messy, because you have to deal with the social, you have to deal with the economic, you have to deal with the philosophic, and there are so many other issues to be dealt with. Whereas an animal, when it builds its nest, or a spider when it builds its net, seems to be doing it in a more subconscious, pristine way. So would that be an appropriate reading of what the book is also alluding to, or could you elaborate on that very idea? Because it kind of provoked my thinking on it.
That's a very appropriate interpretation. But let me just explain where my interest comes from. As a child during the Second World War, I lived at my maternal grandfather's tiny farm in central Finland, and I was the only boy within kilometers of distance, fields and forests, mostly forests. So I had no company during the days, endless days, and I began to watch animals, their behavior, their nest building, what they did. And this evoked a interest which was then came back in 1976 when I ran into a book by the Nobel laureate Dr. I'll tell the name in a second, in a bookshop in New York. And I suddenly re-encountered my childhood days and interests. And von Frisch was the name of the Nobel laureate. And I immediately, when I returned back home to Helsinki, I wrote a letter to Dr. von Frisch and suggested that could we do an exhibition together on animal architecture. I would be the architect and compile the exhibition catalog. A few days later, I received a letter from his secretary saying, Dr. Frisch is 92 years old and he doesn't feel that he has the strength to collaborate with you, but he wishes you good luck and gives permission to all his research work, his drawings and photographs. So I did it without him. But I just wanted to tell you this before I answer your question.
Sure.
To show how I drift from one thing to another. I've never planned my life. I just drift, and I from one thing to the next. And I usually tell my students the worst thing you can do to yourself is to start planning your life, because if you do that, you pass by the chances, the accidental things that fate offers you. At any rate, for instance, spiders, which built some of the finest structures on Earth, they have existed for about 400 million years. And they have woven nets, capture nets, about 380 million years. The oldest human constructions are usually dated with the invention, taming of fire, which usually is nowadays defined as 600,000 years ago. So many of the animals have been working on perfecting the constructions for 380 million years, whereas we have done it for 600,000 years. And that, of course, in the evolutionary process makes a fantastic difference. And one of my messages, which I'm increasingly interested in, is how could we reconnect ourselves with the kind of evolutionary processes. Because now, since the modernity, we have the whole realm of architecture has been perpetually building a continuous prototype of prototypes, millions of prototypes, but there is no feedback, practically any feedback, whereas in the evolutionary cycle, the failed architect is eliminated from the process. How could we get more serious about our criteria than just the commercial appeal or superficial aesthetic appeal? And this is tied with one of my interests in the past years is what is aesthetics really? And I'm particularly interested in the connection of aesthetics and ethics. There are now inspiring books on how aesthetic choice also operates in the animal world. But it is another aesthetic than our often manipulated and how would I say, prejudiced idea of aesthetics. So my question is, how could we develop a evolutionary aesthetics which is tied with natural processes or is not in blatant conflict with the natural process? That's how how animal constructions are related with my general thinking.
Sure. Yeah, wonderful. I think there's a certain connection that the book makes between animal construct and your own preoccupation of the return to origins. In how do you see the return to origins or trying to understand the beginnings of architecture? In looking back, how are we really going to search for if we have lost something in the act of making in the modern world, because it's turned into something very visual? You make connections to the fact that serious Western European tradition has moved to the visual and geometric form, and maybe forgotten the idea that it's about human experience. How would you connect these three notions, the animal, the primordial beginnings, and the fact that we've landed in a culture that is consumerist and visual and form oriented?
I often tell my students that we are all millions of years old. We do not easily accept the fact that we are part of an evolutionary process. And there are still physical features and certainly also neurological features in our constitution, which are millions of years old. And this also applies. This applies to our body, which has these remains of our earlier life, but also our mind. Our mind is a layered mind. It's layered first, always in every percept. It takes place now, in the past, and in the future. Every single observation is rooted in these three temporal dimensions. And it is also layered in terms of early layered personal memories, early childhood memories especially, but then also longer primordial memories. And in fact, as Freud and Jung, for instance, initially argued, these deep forgotten memories, subconscious memories, they give the power to artistic expressions, poetry and art of imagery. And I would also say definitely architecture is fundamentally echoed, or they echo these primordial, rather collective memories. That is again almost totally forgotten and not taught in schools, because nowness being fashionable up in front is what we are taught to aspire for. I have always been in the how would I say minority by sticking to historical values and even ecological biological values. And I'm of the opinion nowadays that architecture schools should have should teach biology related to ecology and ecological history, and also in the other end of the spectrum, neuroscience, how we process experiences. And nowadays, much of what we believe in is just, rumor, but there is a possibility of knowing also. At the very moment, I'm very interested in things like dark matter and dark energy, simply because they bring one's view to the edge of what is possible for the human mind to understand or grasp.
No, what is fascinating about this book, there are that at one level, the book is presented as an encyclopedia of fragments. So if an architect or attempts to read the book, he almost becomes an archaeologist in some ancient site searching for fragments which can have many meanings. And so your book really allows us to open any page and start off. It is not a linear book, and in that sense, the book is very different from the book that opens and starts in the beginning and ends. It's not a linear process. So it's something that you can read in whichever way you like and derive different meanings from it. That was one part. The other part, coming back to the primordial, I recall you once telling me about an experience of an office in Helsinki that was very hands-on, very warehouse-like. If I'm not mistaken, you worked in an office of that kind when you were young. And how do you differentiate between that kind of an office and an office that is making visual drawings? And because what is the role, if one can elucidate or speak more about, because your book makes a case for that 5 years of architectural education should have also built a memory and a knowledge of material into the architect, and that engagement with the material. And I found that particularly important, given the way that we are today. We have no other choice but to go digital because of quarantine, and that at the same time, we need to remember that as architects, we're dealing with materiality, we're dealing with the tactility, and we're dealing with what you describe as the multisensorial experience. And I was just remembering your conversations of the early warehouse kind of Italia kind of architectural spaces, studios that kind of conjured the buildings of the past. And could you elucidate more, because it may give us some insights into architectural education on the return to that?
Well, let me first say that architecture is very often seen as problem solving. I don't think so. Architects, when a true architect begins an architectural project, nobody knows what is going to come out. There is not even a problem. There may be a program, but it's not a problem. Architecture is always more about a new way, a completely unexpected way of seeing how things are related. So architecture is more an archaeological project than problem solving. And that is why also the temporal depth is part of the issue. Yes, as I have written so many times, Western people in particular, but also I would say people universally have turned increasingly visual. The visual judgment and visual the visual understanding of architecture and arts prevails. But we have not been visual people very long. It took place in the late or mid 16th century. The invention of printing was a decisive invention that started to make us visual focused beings. And architectural education nowadays, it tends to continue this visual emphasis to make us increasingly visual. But visual by definition means that what we see is outside of us. That's the definition of seeing. But in architecture, we need to internalize what we are doing in order to be able to empathically imagine it. And that is where we need a multisensory attitude to the world, a multisensory connection with the world. And especially tactility is important because as many writers have written, the touch is the mother of the senses, and that is directly connected with materiality. We tend, as architects, modern architects, we tend to think in terms of form, and then consider materials as a secondary, more technical issue. I have now for 15 or 20 years given tasks in my studios where the students are asked not to sketch at all with paper and pencil, but choose certain materials for their projects and then do all the sketching with that material. If they choose water, they have to sketch with water. If they choose fire, it's got to be fire in all their sketches. This idea came initially from Gaston Bachelard, one of my favorite writers, who differentiates two different imaginations, formal imagination and material imagination. And he also argues that material imagination is emotionally deeper than formal imagination. I fully agree with that observation. I have been writing an essay on the Swedish architect Sigurd Leverentz in the last couple of weeks, and this is a inventory of his non-visual language.
Yeah. So in this act of the multi-sensorial, if we went back into your own early days, I think it was the late 50s, when you were practicing in Finland or you were working in an architect's office in Finland. I remember an incident that it was very different. It was atelier-like. It was not in the form of an office. What kind of creative inspiration derives based on the kind of office that an architect sets up?
Yes, until computers entered architectural practice, architects' offices in Finland and I guess elsewhere looked like sculptors or painters' studios, a bit messy, and there was noise and talk and music and movement and so forth. I miss that atmosphere, which is very stimulating because you are present with your entire being and communicate with your entire being as you should do in design work. Nowadays, architects' offices look the same as lawyers or engineers' offices. People isolated, no sound, very little interaction. I think this demonstrates what is secretly happening to our attitudes and thinking through the excessive use of computers. The computer renderings reveal the fact that there is no life in the computerized process unless you are smart enough to inject it in the process, but usually architects are not. Whereas when you draw, you live every single line, every single surface and edge through your body, and you cannot make a real drawing without internalizing what you do. Whereas today, the computer renderings, I can hardly look at them because they have no life. There are maybe hundreds of people implanted into the picture, but they are like flowers in a vase, dead flowers. I think this is serious. I'm not speaking against computers or any other inventions. I'm just saying there are hidden agendas and hidden impacts that we should acknowledge, identify, and be careful about. Now, the digitalization, I think, accelerates the visuality and focused nature of architecture. In architecture, in my view, the unfocused peripheral observation is much more important, simply because by definition, when we see something in focus, we are outside of it. How do we then experience architectural space? Through peripheral perception. And I don't know any school of architecture where peripheral perception would be seriously taught. I think that should be one more class in the new school.
No, it definitely is a important provocation and would open a completely new avenue of conversation in pedagogies of schools if we took this seriously, and I think it needs to be taken seriously. But on another note, linked to this but not directly linked, I often see a whole array of books, and I'm sure your home is a library unto itself. There's an array of books, and I recall an early statement you made that when you began in the early years as a young architect, you had divided your library into architecture books and other books. Am I right? And then there was a revelation across the years in the way you categorize the books in a library. Could you share that with us on how does one recategorize the value of a book in a library? Because you had divided it into architecture books, and then I think there were two segments called the other books, and which had music, which had film, which had theater, which had about city life. So could you elaborate to us? Poetry, yeah, poetry especially. Poetry. Our president is a poet himself, so he would recognize when you speak about poetry. Could you tell us how that categorization began to change and shift from when you're a young architect till now?
I think this happened during I was working in Africa, in Ethiopia. I was professor at the Haile Selassie University for 2.5 years, and I was disconnected from the Western situation of academic studies and research and so forth. And I simply realized that architecture books are usually, they lack life, whereas all other books are about life. So I realized also, or came to the opinion, that all good books are architecture books because they describe the human situation, the human existential situation. And that is also the primary task of architecture, is to relate our sense of self to the world in both spatial and temporal dimensions. Yes, I often also say to my students that when I have begun a project, I have practically never since the 60s looked at books or journals of similar projects by other architects. Never. I would go to my art books, look at the works of the Siena school painters in the 13th and 14th centuries. I would look at Piero della Francesca, Vermeer, etc., not for the purpose of seeking architectural solutions, sort of examples on what I'm doing, but inspiring me. I think the main, most important thing is to develop the right mentality, to soften your personality and open it up to the world before you begin to work. Yes, all books are architecture books, and I think the only criteria in terms of whether a book is meaningful architecturally or not is whether it's a good book. I would say all good books are about architecture because they are necessarily about our relationship with the world.
Wonderful, because I think in that context, the the book Inseminations really opens it up. It is paradoxical. It calls itself an encyclopedia and is yet open-ended. And it seems to appear that the book celebrates the idea of the fragment, that there are several fragments that come together, and there is no desire or urge to make it a linear unfolding, make it logical in the sense. And so it's more about fragments that are collated together, fragments that can, when the reader puts two fragments next to one another, it kind of gives another meaning. And maybe, let me know if my reading was right again. You would be happier if the reader derived his own or her own meanings after reading the book, rather than meanings that you would want to prescribe onto the reader. That's the sense I'm left with the book.
Absolutely, that's the meaning of the subtitle, Seeds for Architectural Thought. I am inseminating the reader's field of imagination to apply or feel inspired for architectural thought. I'm not giving the architectural thought in the same way that I have used myself early paintings as inspiration for architecture. And I believe in fragments. Everybody's life is a collection, a unique collection of fragments. I think also science is fragmented knowledge of the world. As I mentioned earlier, I'm now interested in cosmology, and for instance, the theory of everything, which physicists aspire for. But even if that could be found, it would be a theory, very reductive condensation, conceptual condensation, as opposed to lived reality. And as architects, we are fundamentally dealing with lived reality, which consists of fragments. So our work as architects is engaged in fragments, absolutely. So I have, and many people consider dealing with fragments as somehow reductive, or a kind of, how would I say, almost confession that I have not succeeded. I myself feel successful for accepting the collage, fragmented manner of life, and also the fact that we can sense perhaps the most important things of life peripherally in an unfocused way. For instance, poetry, if you read it just, like you would read a chapter of mathematics or philosophy, you fail to see the poetry in it. In reading poetry, you have to permit yourself for unfocused associations and perceptions.
Wonderful. Could I reinterpret it that after almost 9 decades on this planet, your experience tells us to free ourselves, enjoy contradiction, enjoy paradox, immerse in human experience, observe and see what it is about, rather than theorize and put everything in some linear order which reduces our enjoyment of life and architecture? Is that the latent or subtle message that comes through? I mean, I am being a little provocative now.
No,
Is that the message that comes through, that we need to really engage with life with all its contradictions and paradoxes, and because that's the nature of life, and that's what architecture needs to do, is the message I get at the end of the book.
you condensed my message quite well, better than I would have done it. But it takes quite a lot of reading and life experience and self-assurance to leave certainties away and enter a uncertain world. You have to be a bit, how would I say, courageous. An uncertainty which comes as a weakness doesn't serve you much. You have to be certain about your uncertainty. Then it serves your artistic and intellectual purposes and philosophical purposes.
No, I think then if that is the line, I'm beginning to see that it is at one level even calling for a rethink of architectural education. It is calling for a deeper observation that can maybe equip an architect to understand life, to understand materiality, to understand the act of building. And in that, why would you go back to your memories of visiting the Dogon village? What do you see in Mali that you think we can go back to and learn from in Mali?
Mali is particularly the Dogon Canyon in Bandiagara is one of the most impressive experiences I have had in my life. And what has impressed me is total weaving together of mental world and the built world of houses and objects and daily practices. The Dogon mythology, which was put together by a French archaeologist. The book is named Conversations with Ogo Temmeli. Ogo Temmeli was the last living Dogon priest who carried on the age-old mythology. And the thing that impressed me was that everything now in the daily life and practice and work, etc., is related with mythology, with how the world was created. And this gives everything a deep depth meaning, which we tend to lose in our rationalized life. And this controls, gives everything what they do a sense of beauty. When I lived in my at my former grandfather's house, I never heard anyone use the word beauty, but everything that the farmers did was beautiful because it was somehow connected with this cycle of farmers' life, which are, of course, deeply engaged with the seasons of the year and weather and everything, cyclical understanding. I still remember my grandfather going out of the house to the yard in his pajama, sniffing the air, feeling the direction of the wind, and then we knew now we would know what we are going to do this day. It was tuning human life with the nature. And I think that is what we should aim at again in architecture. I think we are going too far into an artifice, and the technical inventions tend to cut our connections with that primordial natural world. And one of the main connections is the human hand. At the moment that we are not anymore using the hand in a fully engaged, emotionally engaged way, I think we take distance from reality.
Yeah, it really brings me back to two issues. One, now again, I may speculate or provoke for the sake of the conversation. One, there is always seems to be a certain kind of romanticization of the hands-on. And the romanticization of the hands-on in the contemporary architect, for some reason, still appears to be very concerned or obsessed with the idea of how it looks, versus the manner in which Professor Doshi also talks about the Rajasthan bunny villages, and how they intuitively built their homes, and the intuitive building, and vernacular architecture also shows that there was an intuition that built, and then the process made it beautiful. It was not a concern for beauty by which we have preconceived notions of beauty and then place something forgetting that it's for human existence. And is that one of your core investigation in this book? And though presented in fragments, I think one sees a hidden weave of this idea.
Well, I have become very concerned with beauty, what beauty is. And I think that the way that beauty is pictured in architecture schools or the profession nowadays is intellectualized and remote from real life. It has become more a means of manipulation than enrooting. I think architecture should always enroot us in reality, but then at the same time liberate us. Meaningful art and architecture always liberates, gives the reader or viewer or listener a personal freedom and encourages to go along this self, how would I say, go towards aspects which arise from the individual rather than being told something. What did you ask now? I got myself.
In the sense that if I can rephrase it, the book seems to say that in an architect's training, now I'm bringing it in the context of an architect's training,
Yes.
because we were talking to schools of architecture and young architects, that an observation and an experiential understanding of nature can be the root of engaging with how we build, or how we in the act of constructing.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a fan of so-called organic architecture. But for instance, Frank Lloyd Wright, who used the notion of organic architecture, his architecture is very tectonic and closer to the steel in Holland than any organic examples. I think understanding what organic processes are is more important than admiring the shapes or trying to imitate the shapes. Well, again, I lost my...
No, in that context, if we read back, in that context, how did Dhaka, Louis Kahn's assembly building, how did it fascinate you? Because at one level, we have a very intuitive process of the Mali community in Dogon. Like, it's almost like the community in Kutch or in Bani villages in northwest India. But then we have Bangladesh and we have Louis Kahn's assembly. How did it inspire you? What was your experience when you experienced that building when you're in Bangladesh? Because there are two different ways of the act of construction.
Yes. Well, when I was taken to the parliament building and I saw it from half a kilometer's distance, I had difficulties keeping my balance because I was so overpowered by the force of geometry. It was so powerful. And I remembered an earlier experience about 20 years before in Luxor, Egypt, at the Karnak temple, where I had an architectural experience that I have never had before or after. I lost my sense of self. The architecture was so authoritative and powerful that I became part of that geometricized pharaonic space myself, which was a fantastic feeling. But that is what great architecture does. We associate ourselves, identify ourselves with that. I often say that when we enter a space, the space enters us. And that was the power by which the Karnak temple entered me. The same power was in Louis Kahn's parliament. And I had a recollection of Karnak. And as I went back home, traveled back to Finland and looked at Kahn's sketchbooks, he had visited Karnak just before he started the parliament building. So the association with Karnak was quite appropriate. It was there. Yes, and this is what is peculiar and very important in high quality art, is that it is completely ignorant of time. The cave paintings, European cave paintings, which are about 27,000 years old, they speak to us with the same freshness and nowness than any painting done today.
Yeah.
But 27,000 years disappear completely. But it also works in other fields, more intimate fields. I often advise my students to select the mentors carefully and not forgetting the possibility of taking an artist or thinker or writer who died 500 years ago as their mentor. And for me, for instance, Piero della Francesca has that role. My great friend Tapio Virkkala, the legendary Finnish designer, he often told me that his real teacher was Piero della Francesca, although Piero died 472 years before Tapio was born. But in the reality of art, you can travel back and forth, and the smart ones do it and gain from that time travel.
Amazing. In that context, how do you see the experience of medieval towns? So we've seen Dogon Mali, we've visited Louis Khan in Bangladesh. What are your experiences of medieval towns? So you were there, we met at Venice the last time, and I know Venice has become a little commercialized, but still carries its old charm. But what would you say is your experience of medieval towns? Was there another act of construction there that, because there is a risk of romanticization of medieval towns because modern life is very different, but at the same time, there may be lessons that we can draw as contemporary or 21st architects in the 21st century that we can still learn from medieval towns. Are there any lessons there, or what would your...
Yes, but one often needs to eliminate the layer of today's civilization, particularly tourism, which is very often appalling, like in Venice. Venice is best, as Joseph Brodsky, who spent 27 of his last New Years in Venice, writes in his book, fantastic book, Watermark. Venice is best in the winter, when there is a bit ice in the streets and the shallow ponds of water, because there are no tourists then. I have experienced it several times, and it is delightful. No, the medieval town, it reflects so powerfully the density of medieval life, the density in spatial terms, but also in terms of knowledge, and particularly the mythical world. That is why I think I want to visit certain places over and over again, is because these places bring me next to a way of life which has already disappeared. It is the way of life and ways of thinking and believing that I appreciate. Yes, there are, of course, visual aspects about the medieval town which have been much romantically what is the word? Utilized for
yeah.
commercial purposes.
Sure. Having come, I think having alluded to the fact of there's a way of life, beneath those layers, the book seems to kind of say that if there is a certain expression of life where we need to feel happiness, we need to feel pleasure, we need to feel life is meaningful, we really need to feel engaged in life in a very active, vivid manner. You seem to be saying that there are three kinds of meaning. So don't categorize it so clearly. I'm, for the sake of provocation, again
Yeah.
categorizing it. I know the book doesn't categorize it, but you seem to hint at that there are three ways of looking at things or deriving meaning. And you state it as the scientific, the artistic, and the mythical. And the Dogon somewhere is placed in the mythical. How would you differentiate these three ways in which human communities today live, and maybe they reduce the way, instead of enjoying the whole of life, they compartmentalize themselves into certain silos and lose a larger experience of life? Is that what the book is attempting to convey?
In a way, as you said, not directly, but I have also written in the past few years about the categories of science and art. Gaston Bachelard separates absolutely image, concept, and image. And as a philosopher of science, he argues that there is no way of mediation between concept and image, which is a rather tough argument from a person who was respected philosopher of science and poetic imagery. And but I know what he means. Science deals with concepts and abstractions, whereas the artistic world might have concepts and abstractions as components, or as especially components of the process. But finally, it has to focus on lived experience, because that's the world of art. And Bachelard says that the scientific approach cannot say anything meaningful about life. Life has to get its meaning through life, and art is close to that heartbeat of life. Brancusi, one of my favorite artists, he didn't write much, but he has a sentence in which he says that he says that a real piece of art needs to give immediately, at once, a sense of life, a sense of breathing. I think it's a very, very good.
Is there then, if I could draw out, I know it's not stated, I'm consciously stating the unstated at times for the provocation of a conversation.
Yes, yes.
Is there a deep desire, stated or unstated, that the human being actually has a much more deeper, profound sense of self, and we in the contemporary world have reduced ourselves to a very rigid definition of what the human being can be? And because of that, the cities we construct, the buildings we construct today lack the just freedom and the expression and the vividity and the paradox that we needed to really enjoy as a human race. And adding to that, you have said that that can happen when the human race extends itself beyond the human race to begin to respect and celebrate other species on Earth. That's almost an ecological, ethical position for architecture that you resurrect. Am I right in this reading, or am I
Yeah.
reading too much into this?
No, you are absolutely right. I think that among today's writers, Edward O. Wilson, in his book Biophilia, which he defines as the love and science of life, he has formulated very well. That is the lifelike aspects in the arts or our thinking. The process of socialization, becoming a social individual, can be, and usually is, rather violent, because it suffocates individual freedom and also the unconscious world, mental world. One of the reasons, or one of the needs for an artist, and I believe also an authentic architect, is to liberate oneself with those formal social or intellectual or even moral constraints, and seek what arises ethically from direct acknowledgement of being a living creature among millions and billions of other living creatures. And the result probably will be a little bit different than what we learn in schools. I am a great admirer of Rainer Maria Rilke, and in one of his notes, Rilke says that artists and writers should exercise their imagination in the same way that sportsmen exercise their muscles. I think this is a powerful advice. In schools of architecture, the focus should be on exercising the capacity of imagination, but usually it is more a way of tying the poor student to certain rules or prejudices.
What comes across in this, and again, if we can venture into the gray area of paradoxes, I'm fascinated by the way for the last few decades you have seriously engaged with a certain rigor into the study of neurosciences. And if one were to logically take that kind of a path of saying that one gets into neuroscience to understand the human mind, the human need, the human desire, so that architecture becomes more relevant. And at the same time, the book simultaneously seems to say at the end of that research that there can never be a theory of architecture. Am I right in that statement? It's a very strong argument to make that, because if I read you in the early days, I was almost anticipating that Professor Pallasmaa in his 80s is going to give us this theory of architecture on
the formula.
Platter. Yeah, and we're going to discover it because he's found the relationship between the human mind and the act of construction. And you have come to a position of, I would think it appeared quite emphatic that we need not look at a theory of architecture, because architecture is about generalization and uncertainty and just enjoying life, which is again paradoxical. So why do you want to constrain it with a theory and box ourselves and then chain ourselves in what is a theory? Now I'm provoking it a little further. I hope I am on the right direction when I say this, as what came to my mind when I read the book.
Yes, well, theory, as the word is used in in science implies a construct that can predict certain processes, the results of certain processes. Whereas architecture, I said already earlier, it is often seen as problem solving. I would ask, what problem? It is more a confession. A real piece of architecture is more a confession than problem solving. Just think of Louis Kahn's Parliament. What problem does it solve? It is a confession about the architects' belief in cosmical values, which are reflected should be reflected in architecture and culture as such. Yes, I don't believe in the possibility of architectural theory, complete architectural theory, simply for the reason that architecture is made up of so many dozen contradictory things. Utility and metaphysics, for instance, and pleasure and cost, engineering and artistic aspect. Just you could easily make 5 dozen, conflicting pairs that coexist in the architectural task. You can only get into a completion of your work as an architect by hitting a point where you believe in what you are doing. That's the theory. And then you from that point on, you keep refining it in aesthetic and technical terms. But and there's very much necessarily autobiographical in all art, including architecture. I'm not saying that it should be that way, it is that way. And if it is sincere. In today's world, architecture is increasingly seen and educated as a preconceived profession, expertise and profession. We have become a service profession, like lawyers and engineers. I don't want to enter that development. All my writing is to, slow down that process.
Wonderful, because in that context, I had once discussed with another author who had been a prolific writer, and for the last 10 years, he found that he was not able to write because he believed that we've landed in the age of disagreement, that we revel in disagreeing on every concept as architects. And if we revel in disagreement, it becomes difficult to write, is what he had. But your book, through the idea of fragments, through the idea of the seeds, where the reader can interpret certain universal ideas in their own, with their own predilections and their own past, because you say that childhood is really the root of that, or of that experience, for an architect. Seems to be opening up a new avenue to write about the experiential dimension. Was this a conscious, or was this, conscious is not the right word, was this in the making, in the mind, that would you agree that we've reached an age of disagreement among architects or among artists, where communication is breaking down today? and that in that context, we still need to discover certain basic aspects of how we live.
Well, this development is very concretely visible in politics, the political reality, which is everywhere becoming more, there's more tension and disagreement. But I think it basically comes from two processes, individual human separation, and then also professional or intellectual specialization. We are becoming more and more specialized and focused, but to the degree that it's hard to name a real political leader anymore, simply because that kind of wide vision is lost. Perhaps Václav Havel, the poet president of Czechoslovakia, and Nelson Mandela were last generalists who projected an ethical principle in the political reality.
Sure. So because
yes, yes,
yeah.
I would just try to complete
Sure.
my answer. I think we, in architectural education and profession, we need to strengthen the empathic relationship to the world. Now, even among the most celebrated architects, the design task is seen as a personal possibility of manifesting one's beliefs.
Mm.
There is another way of working through empathy, and I think empathy is something that should also be trained in architecture schools.
Sure.
But today's architectural atmosphere with architectural publications, it feeds a lack of empathy rather than empathy. This is again a somewhat tender issue because empathy is easily seen as something, how would I say, romantic. In the same way as atmosphere as a concept has been neglected by architects and seen as something romantic, which should be left to stage designers and window decorators. Whereas we have not noticed that every moment in our lives is strongly influenced by atmosphere, something we do not consciously analyze or perhaps even recognize, but it tunes our entire being and consequently also directs both our feelings and thoughts.
Would it, if I could extend on that idea, it seems you seem to also hint at the fact that probably filmmakers and artists today are engaging in the imagination of space in a deeper way than most architects. Am I reading it in the way I need to, or am I?
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I said earlier that I used to look at old paintings to get inspired. When you look at paintings of Fra Angelico, for instance, how he depicts buildings in Italian towns, they are almost like living creatures. Houses are buildings are almost conversing with each other in Fra Angelico's paintings. It is architecture is primarily, in my view, a mediating relational art form, which gets its power from connecting this and that, both in visual or auditive aspects in the landscape or location, but then also connecting metaphysical ideas, perhaps religious ideas in some cases, with practical aspects of life. My favorite philosopher is Maurice Merleau-Ponty, and he has a wonderful line where he says that we come not to see the work of art, we come to see the world according to the work. This applies to architecture completely.
Wonderful, wonderful. It just means that architectural education and the very practice of architecture needs to then re-engage with this larger aspect of life if we believe that society needs to be just happy with its paradoxes and really attempt to immerse more in life. Is that what we are saying? That
Yes, yes, but also
would-
intellectually, we should, limit the time and interest that we spend inside a bubble of architecture and open ourselves to literature, poetry, science, all the arts, etc. I find almost any book that I open very interesting and inspiring as an architect, because they open up a angle, each one opens an angle to life that I have, and via that to architecture, that I have not thought because I have been blinded by a formalistic approach.
Mhm. Because it comes, I think that argument comes through quite strongly, that the formal approach and the merely functional approach that we reduce architecture to, in a way, impacts inhabitation. And if I extend it, it very subtly hints at the fact that a lot of problems that we experience in the city, in the way we inhabit space, in the way we inhabit public space, or the problem of housing, has come to the fact that we've defined the human being in a very narrow way, and we've not. We need to now open up the potential or the possibility of what this human is about, their desires, their aspirations, their need to enjoy life, and that joy could open up a new direction for architecture. Would I be right? And that's the kind of
Yes, absolutely. In the very beginning, you asked me about medieval towns. It is perhaps not the visual appeal of the medieval towns, townscapes, that makes the strongest impact on us. It is the sense of life that we enter. We enter medieval life, which is dense with human meanings. If you look at medieval paintings, they are always dense, both spatially and socially dense spaces. It is the imagined life, imaginary life, that inspires us in architecture. Exactly as Merleau-Ponty says, it's not the building; it is the life that it suggests that is important.
does that, because there are two other notions that seem to be underlying this text, is that one you call the arrogance of perfection, the
Yes.
other you call humanizing vulnerability. And you kind of juxtapose these two ideas of one where an architect thinks that he's going to define the life of everybody, and the singular heroic architect that Ayn Rand may have talked about, and then that kind of an architect has a preconceived notion of what he's building to improve. It's almost as if architect is messiah in that, versus the architect who's humanizing vulnerability by celebrating contradiction, paradox, and observing these contradictions in society and attempting to respond to it with a certain uncertainty. Would that be another reading that one can
Yeah,
freely?
yeah, yes. In my mind, perhaps the greatest architect of all time is Michelangelo.
Okay.
I love to visit Florence and Michelangelo's Laurentian library. And when I enter that stair hall, tears come to my eyes immediately. And it is so powerfully melancholic in a way that accepts, it is great, but it accepts human vulnerability and basic freedom. I don't know of any other building which would do this fantastic thing that through its artistic perfection makes you experience your vulnerability. And also everything is perfect, yet you come out with a feeling of uncertainty, but not a desperate, a feeling of desperate uncertainty, but just a calm acceptance of the uncertainties of life and the world as that. As I said earlier, I'm now reading a couple of books in cosmology, and that is the point also in physics nowadays. It is the point of unexplainable things. Things just go beyond human intelligence.
Wonderful, wonderful. Because I think the trajectory seems to say that the savoring or the imbibing of uncertainty is the human dimension of empathy, of respecting two human beings, of respecting a human being and nature. Are we saying that it requires uncertainty and not the arrogance of perfection? Are we saying that in some way?
Absolutely. As Joseph Brodsky, the Nobel laureate poet, says, certainty sort of closes the conversation or issue, whereas uncertainty keeps it perpetually open. And that also applies to your mind. At least I'm trying to maintain my constant uncertainty at the face of things. Well, it has also become a strategy for me to come to a boundary and then just decide I'm not going to go beyond. I'm not even trying.
And architecturally, would it recover? We could close in some time. And architecturally, would it reflect in your notions that you experienced in Mali or Venice? That the kind of spaces that emerge from this architectural understanding are spaces which are flexible, spaces that don't define too much of how the human should live, but give him a freedom of occupying and inhabiting the space in different ways. And when the way of inhabiting that space changes, the meaning and the memories that the community carries about those spaces also changes. So there's a new layering of flexibility, there's a new layering of how one wants to see those dimensions rather than defining this as the living room, and boxing it in very clear terms.
Well, that's exactly what I mean by the open-endedness of the artistic proposal. It is a stimulation to feel and think, but it doesn't give an answer. It cannot give an answer. And that is when I said 27,000-year-old cave paintings move us powerfully. Yes, because they bring us to the permanent dimensions of being a human. They bring us in front of the existential question: who are we? Why are we here? And that moves us, hits our consciousness. So looking at the cave painting and Picasso is the same experience, because it's this awe in front of a miracle, an unanswered question. And that's also the case in science. Albert Einstein said that both in art and science, the most beautiful thing is the mysterious.
Wonderful. So we are almost coming to the end of our session, and I would hope that we can have many more as and when you have the time. But we could take some time to kind of complete it. One, to recall now what we discussed. You believe that there probably emphatically it's not feasible to come up with a comprehensive theory of architecture. That's one. The second that I take home is that an architect needs to rediscover the complete possibilities of the mind and the body of the human being, and engage with the tactile materiality, so that the way we inhabit the planet is more empathetic and more ecological at the same time. And it didn't need really a theory, it just needed a deeper observation.
Yes.
Is that what the latent intent of the book is?
Yes, yes. And then also to understand and try to understand and accept the importance of the evolutionary process, both in the biological world, but then also the evolutionary process continues also in the human race, even today. Although we are trying our best to misguide
Absolutely, absolutely.
trains the course of evolution.
Absolutely.
And then one point is that when going back to the Merleau-Ponty idea, that which I would like to emphasize, is that when we are designing an architectural project, a lot more is involved in that. And metaphysical, philosophical, psychological, whatever, for the reason that Andrei Tarkovsky, the Russian great film director, he has a line where he says, an artistic work is not an idea by the author. It is the entire world as reflected on a drop of water.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Because coming back to it, I recall a statement by Calvino saying that it's the encyclopedic, or it's the organization of fragments that can be reorganized all the time, that generate a certain inspiration for meaning. Does this book in some way attempt or allude or connect with that idea?
Absolutely, absolutely. I have myself been very interested in collage as an expressive means in the arts, many arts, including architecture. And as you said in the very beginning, this book sort of gives fragments of thought and emotion which can be recombined. And I would be very happy if the readers would enjoy this, make their own collages out of these fragments.
A fascinating statement in the book was that you can read a book and place it back in the library shelf, and yet the book remains in the mind.
Yes.
place the
Yeah.
book, and I think the formation of imagination, the formation of inspiration to design, in a way gets communicated or conveyed through these very subtle, nuanced processes. In the fact that they really inspire something more than the expected.
Yeah.
And
Well, I have a library of about 10,000 books, which I have already legally donated to the Architecture Museum. That as long as I actively write, I have agreed that I will keep the books around me in this office space. And my memory works kind of geographically or topologically. When I'm writing, I remember a certain shelf in my tens of library shelves. And then I navigate to that area and I find a book. I didn't remember the title of it, which includes an idea that fits to my current thought. So my memory is very much in the books, and the books are in my memory simultaneously.
wonderful, wonderful. And I guess because the memory is malleable, as you describe it, that the memory is enriching and changing, as opposed to computer memory, which is static. That memory
Yes.
is uploaded and static. Human
Yes.
memory is modifying itself all the time, and which is why it gives new insights.
Yeah, yes, and the human memory discards things that you have lost interest in, whereas it keeps a vital connection with the things that you are interested in.
Absolutely. So in fact, what it means is that forgetting something is as important as remembering something.
Absolutely,
I think
absolutely, absolutely.
and so and in that the paradox is born, in that the contradiction is born, in that the recognition, the comfortable recognition that we are imperfect also emerges.
That's right.
And I think that's the reading I got from this book. It was
Yeah.
very inspiring to read this book. We read it with a small group of students, and we are joined, if I can open it briefly now to some one or two
Yes.
questions. We are joined by students from the Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka, and across India. One of the students raises the question, if you are not for a comprehensive theory of architecture, can there be a fragmented juxtaposition of part theories that just allude to a sense of what the whole could be?
Absolutely. That's what I'm my life's work in writing is compiling the ingredients, fragmented ingredients for an impossible architectural theory. That's what I'm doing.
Wonderful, wonderful, very paradoxical, and we await definitely the next book. And we look forward. I think you made again an unstated promise to us that your 90th birthday will be in India, and we shall await the 90th birthday.
No, it will be Doshi's 100th birthday.
Doshi's 100th birthday.
Yes, when I left his 90th birthday, I said to him, Doshi, I will come to your 100th birthday. And I didn't realize at the moment that I will be 90 myself.
Wonderful.
I have to struggle.
Wonderful. I think that would be a great celebration with Professor Doshi at 100. You are 90, and we on behalf of the Indian fraternity, we celebrate it in India with. I think we have our immense dose of contradiction, complexity, imperfection, which you experienced in India. And I think in comparison, Finland still attempts that very sublime, calm perfection, compared to India. I'm saying, I'm not referring to Aalto's work, of course, but in general, and so we look forward to it. I'm very happy that the president of our council is a poet, and so he's dealing with the irrational dimensions of poetry and the need to streamline architecture in a certain way, because there are professional obligations as well. It cannot remain as uncertain as we'd like it to be. So I think on that we could close with a few thoughts from the president and Professor Pallasmaa. This is the beginning. I don't take this as the end. I take this as the beginning. Please feel free at any time to, or we of course are going to invite you several times over. But please feel free to write or when we communicate. And I do feel the book is uh, very profound and it would need probably a few more discussions. Yeah, it would need. I've got back to rereading and I'm sometimes concerned whether I read it in another way the earlier time and I'm reworking my own formulation. So that's the kind of book that has come across. It's not a prescription anymore, and I'm enjoying the fact that I'm rereading the book each time and something else is emerging in the mind.
Well,
So that's,
you are pointing out now a strategy of mine. I include repetitions in my writings for the reasons that it sort of awakes the reader for a moment. Did I read this already?
yeah, exactly. I did see that, but the repetition is also with a very subtle nuance where you twist us into some other direction by inviting Bachelard or inviting Rilke each time in some other way. So I think that's the exciting aspect of this book, that it can be reread infinite times. It's not a book one can read and say I've read it, and that's why I like the book. And I would invite our president, Mr. Habib Khan, who is a poet and would appreciate the notions of uncertainty, because poetry is about that. And you do describe the fact that poetry and science seem to be going in opposite directions, but they probably meet somewhere. You've given some hint or hope
Absolutely.
that they would meet somewhere, and they're not opposites that we want to believe, that one is scientific and the other is poetic. So I invite our president, who's been supporting these dialogues, and to
What an amazing, intense and insightful conversation that you both had. And thank you, Professor Pallasmaa, for sharing your mind space with all of us and our viewers. Whether it was theory opposed to a theory, or the polymath, or void is the force which shapes a space, visualizations by the machine and humans, the comparison, it touched my heart really, actually. And there's so many other things. I mean, it's just out of the world that we had a meaningful conversation, and I'm sure our viewers will be enriched, and we are really thankful that you have shared your thoughts with us today. And thank you, Durganand, for an absolutely well-researched and very, very provocative and thought-provocative interventions that you did. Absolutely amazing beginning to the social reads. And like you said, I am really looking forward to the beginning that we have had with Professor Pallasmaa today. And we hope we have many such conversations. And you mentioned I'm a poet, but when you read a book, of course, yes, every time you read a book, you find something new in it. And that is the, good book, or that is the real thought that actually, you read it 10 times and then you find 10 meanings to the thought that has been expressed in a book. And that is, I'm sure, I'm looking forward to reading this as well by Professor Pallasmaa. And on behalf of the Council of Architecture and the COA social team, COA Social Reads, I really, really thank you, Professor Juhani Pallasmaa, for being with us, and keep guiding us, and keep writing, and keep sharing your mind with us, keep sharing your thoughts with us. It is a wonderful experience that we have had, ethereal and magical, that we all had. Thank you so much, Nandan, and thank you so much, Pallasmaa, for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, and I thank the Council for supporting this. And this is the inaugural beginning for the COA Social Reads, where we're inviting authors from across the world. We have a whole range of authors who are coming in: Rahul Mehrotra, Ranjit Hoskote, many others, and Sanjeev Vidyarthi from Chicago. So we hope that, and I think we couldn't have asked for a more auspicious or inspiring beginning with the kind of reflective thinking and writing that Professor Pallasmaa presents. At times, it takes me back to the 80s and 60s, and yet he, I think, keeps an open-endedness where we're not getting trapped in some dogmas, that modernism got into, but alludes to
And
that primordial spirit, and
in fact, the archiving of these dialogues that we've had, and now the social reads, it's like kind of a treasure for the generations to come. And I'm sure younger artists will get benefited out of this. The kind of intense dialogues that we have had in COA social dialogue, and now in reads, it's like a once in a lifetime opportunity that a young architect or practicing architects come across this kind of a platform and this kind of interaction and dialogue that is happening. Thank you so much once again.
yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.